So in case you're new, my name's David Gariff. I'm a senior lecturer here at the gallery. And what I started last week or so is a 14-part lecture series. So again, those of you who are here for the first time, this is a 14-part lecture series that essentially walks us through the permanent collection of the East Building. We're doing a lot of programming around the East Building this year because it's the 40th anniversary of the opening of the East Building, which opened in 1978. And as, again, sorry for the repetition for those of you who've been here, but we were closed for a number of years, 3 years in fact, and we reopened in 2016, and we totally reinstalled the East Building. So the traffic patterns, the way you see the collection now is not the way you would have seen it prior to the renovation. The biggest switch was that we have the permanent collection now going from the ground floor up, and special exhibitions are in the concourse. In the past, it was actually the opposite. We would have special exhibitions upstairs and the permanent collection scattered into the concourse. So that's no longer the case. So now we have a traffic pattern that is maybe a little bit more user-friendly. And that's the pattern that I have been trying to follow. So here again, we've seen this. This is the banner during the reopening of the East Building. It reopened on September 30th, 2016. This is the Great Kandinsky that we own. And in case you missed the first 3 lectures, I guess it's been 4, 3. These were the rooms we covered already. And so now when you enter the ground level, where the Henri Moore sculpture is, if you turn immediately to your left, you enter this gallery, Extending Tradition French Painting from 1890 to 1940. And this is a kind of potpourri, kind of a smorgasbord of paintings that are kind of a transition from the European art at the end of the 19th century that's in the West Building to what you're going to be seeing in the East Building. There's one gallery in here as well, and that's one devoted to Modigliani, exclusively to Modigliani. So that's part of the this space here. And then if you walk further into the through the atrium, you come to this space, which is devoted to American art and to the school of, in the front, the school of Robert Henri, and then towards the back, the artists associated with Alfred Stieglitz. So that's what I talked about last week, or Tuesday, I guess. So here's the ground floor again. You come in this way. This is the Extending the Tradition, the French painting. These 4, this is the Modigliani gallery. Then if you were to continue to walk, you come into the American gallery here, the front part devoted to Henri, the middle part devoted to Stieglitz, and this back part is a rotating gallery where we feature now works on paper that cannot be exhibited for very long periods of time because they're very light sensitive. So this part of the gallery changes frequently. Now, this is downstairs, so if you come up the stairs, go over the bridge, you find this section here. So now we're no longer on the ground level. We've walked up the stairs, crossed the bridge, and we're on the mezzanine. And what you find now, this used to be very often the entrance to special exhibitions, if you remember. You know, Jasper Johns, whatever, all of them. This was usually where you entered for special exhibitions, but now instead you see this. So now it is the permanent collection. And it is the collection now, as best we can lay it out, of 20th century art, essentially in chronological order. So those of you who had your survey of art history back in college, if you had your book, Fauvism, Cubism, Expressionism, you'd be walking right through your book and you'd be walking right through the galleries now. We've tried to make it very user-friendly. Of course, you all know we have text panels now. So it's essentially this, we could have installed this in 100 different ways. the permanent collection. And certainly it could have been installed in a very, shall we say, cutting edge way in which you would walk in and say, what the heck, what does this got to do with that? And this has got to do, why are these all here? That's not what we did. This is a very conservative hanging, to say the least. But that's good for what I do as a teacher, as an educator, as a lecturer. It's great because essentially it is like a history of art, 20th century art. So Harry Cooper was very sensitive to that, that he wanted things to sort of make sense for people. So now when you come to this big wall here, you see two paintings, a Cubist painting and a Fauve painting. The Fauve painting is by Kees van Dangen, that we'll talk about in a second. It's Saida from 1913, and this is Juan Gris, Fantomas from 1915 here. So what we're setting out for you directly, visually, is the two great modern art movements in the first part of the 20th century, Fauvism and Cubism. And then if you turn to the right, you see this wall. And now within those two movements of Fauvism and Cubism, who are the two leading figures? Picasso and Matisse. I mean, this can't get any simpler. Then we have a beautiful wall panel here that, if you're still not getting it, it sort of tells you about the last rooms in the West building, the post-impressionist room, Cézanne, all those guys, and how it's now, that's looking backward, and then looking forward to what will be happening in the 20th century. And then there are other sort of subtexts here. These are both figural paintings. Who are the two greatest figural painters in the first half of the 20th century? Picasso and Matisse. So they're both figural paintings. That refers to the legacy, again, of Picasso and Matisse. If that's not enough, these are both from the year 1901. So they're two artists at the start of their career, before they get to where they're most famous. This is not Picasso as a cubist. This is not Matisse as a Fauve. So we're getting everything laid out here pretty easily. This is the painting of Pedro Menach by Picasso from 1901, and this is called The Coiffure by Matisse from 1901. These are both Chester Dale pictures. So we're even linking up to those Chester Dale paintings that were in the first gallery that we saw. Think of those two galleries on the ground floor as appetizers. And now you're into the buffet here. Now I'm going to make one little switch. From the chronological point of view, in terms of what is the first great modern art movement of the 20th century, it's not Cubism, it's Fauvism. But because we lay out early Picasso and Cubism, actually when you enter this space, you come through early Picasso first. But then you get into Fauvism and Cubism. So I'm going to go straight into the Fauvism room, which means I'm walking past this room that's behind this wall. So behind that wall is early Picasso, which we'll deal with later. I'm going to put him together with Cubism. So then you walk past this wall into this space, and now you're into, on one half of the room, on one side of the room is Fauvism, on the other half of the side of the room is Cubism. So already this wall is different. So again, things move, we loan things out, we change things, we rotate things. This no longer is present. These two paintings are not on view right now. We've got something else here. So you have to be ready for changes, certainly. But one of the things that was decided was to make sure, and again, this was Harry's decision, and it's a very important one, to try to pull in some things from the West building to be here with the things from the East building so that you could literally see transitions and connections. So this is Monet, obviously. That's Monet's Houses of Parliament, Sunset from 1903. That painting belongs in the West building. That's where we have Impressionism. But now it's in the East building because what was desired was to place it against this view of London by a Fauve, by a French Fauve, André Derain, here. So this is Charing Cross Bridge, by Derain from 1906. And so this whole wall here is beautifully didactic. Instead of me having to hold up a photograph of a Monet when we're in the East Building, you can see it right here. They're both London. They both were inspired by the dealer Ambrose Vollard, who suggested first that Monet go to London, and then because he made so much money off of these paintings, he suggested that Derain go to London later to do the same thing, just go and paint the city and the Thames and all that. But this is an Impressionist and this is a Fauve. And so they're totally different in many ways, but they are linked historically in their pedigree. Derain was certainly aware of Monet, and all the Fauves were aware of the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists. So here's that wall. It's a little dark here again, but at the moment you wouldn't see that. This is getting us. If you go that way, you're going to Cubism. That's a Cubist head by Picasso. So these paintings have an incredible parallelism and connection. The dealer, the subject matter, the connection historically, all of that. So that makes for a beautiful kind of entree. You know, in this situation, I'm sure you know this, you know, we have curators for different parts of the collection, and those paintings are like their babies, their children. So the 19th century French collection is curated and controlled and sort of monitored by Mary Morton. 20th century art is monitored by Harry Cooper, right? So for Harry to get this painting from the West Building, he had to ask Mary's permission. Would you be okay if we took that Monet out of the West Building and brought it over here to the East Building? And obviously she was okay with that. See this painting back here? That's a Toulouse-Lautrec. So Toulouse-Lautrec had a huge impact on the young Picasso when he first comes to Paris. So Harry asked Mary if she'd let us have the Toulouse-Lautrec. She said, okay. You'll see another couple of examples. There's a Cézanne and a Van Gogh in this room as well. And again, Harry had to get permission for those paintings to move. So here we have a kind of the relationships here. Again, Monet on the left, the Houses of Parliament, Sunset from 1903, against Charing Cross Bridge by Derain, 1906. And then another same relationship down here is our Monet Waterloo Bridge, Grey Day from 1903, and another view, London view by Derain, the view of the Thames from 1906. At the moment, all four of these paintings are off view, so you just have to kind of roll with the punches. But this was the one I was showing you on the wall. This comparison is so beautiful because I don't care how many times you go to London and how often you stay and what time of the year or the season, it never looks like this. So what you see right here is the difference between Fauvism and Impressionism. Fauvism is an expressionistic movement. It's a personal response. It's a kind of personal translation of the emotions and feelings about London. It's not this kind of beautifully atmospheric attempt to understand. Remember, if you heard my Cézanne talk, Monet, about the envelope, you know, light and atmosphere. Here's the wall that would be to your left as you pass those paintings on the initial baffle. So here's exactly the same thing. This belongs in the West Building, normally. This is Van Gogh's Olive Orchard. But because Van Gogh was pivotal for all of the Fauves, for Matisse, for Derain, for Vlaminck. Vlaminck said he loved Van Gogh more than his father. We have the Olive Orchard here. And what's interesting is compared to this Derain, when you see the trees here and the way they move, it's a very similar kind of feeling. So here we have Van Gogh's Olive Orchard from 1889, André Derain, The Mountains at Collioure from 1905, and then Albert Marquet at the back, Posters at Trovy from 1906. So two Fauves who both were influenced by Van Gogh. Here's the room, again, just kind of walking around. This is, of course, the star of the collection. This is one of the most important paintings in Western painting, certainly in the 20th century. It's almost the poster child painting for Fauvism, and we happen to have it. It's The Open Window by Matisse. This is a sculpture by Matisse. I'm going to talk about sculpture at the very end of this series of talks, so we'll go around and look at some sculpture. This is not a Fauve painting, but it certainly looks like it could be a Fauve painting. This is by Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, German expressionist. So this is, again, it's really interesting. Kirchner, all the German expressionists were influenced by Fauvism. They all knew about that in 1905. De Broca, this movement of German expressionism, starts in 1905, the very year of the great exhibition of the Fauves in Paris. So Kirchner is the leader of this group in Dresden, and all of these artists, Schmidt-Rottluff, Kirchner, Heckel, Müller, they're looking at the Fauves, but they're not French. They're German. So they approach things a little differently. So this is nice here, because actually when you look at this painting for a few minutes, it starts to get on your nerves a bit. The clashing of color, the diagonal, and things that certainly Matisse would never do. Matisse does not want to get on your nerves. But here it does. But what's nice is how Harry hangs it here, because if you go around that corner, you're into German expressionism. So it's a perfect kind of segue into that other room. So here's the comparing and contrasting of the Van Gogh Olive Orchard, 1889, next to the Derain, Mountains at Collioure from 1905. So as you may or not know, Matisse and Derain were friends. They both traveled to this southern French town of Collioure near the Spanish border in 1905 to paint. And right at the time, in fact, that was happening, that they were making this move, Matisse he was the chairman of a committee in Paris to mount a retrospective exhibition of Van Gogh's work. So Van Gogh was in his mind, as it was for all of these artists. And in fact, when Matisse was asked about Van Gogh, and sort of its impact, he had said, quote, that Van Gogh had, quote, encouraged him to strive for a freer, more spontaneous technique, for more intense, more expressive harmonies. So that was a strong factor, a strong influence for all of the Fauves. There's probably a difference, though, of course, in Van Gogh painting, the expressiveness and the personal kind of transference is not as pronounced as it is in the Fauves and Matisse. They're not really out to give us any kind of personal angst or anxiety about something. So even in this case, Van Gogh's a little bit different. So what happens is Derain and Matisse go off to Collioure together. This is the painting that Derain paints, and of course he's thinking about, look, the trees again are very similar. He's certainly thinking about Van Gogh. But now I'm going to show you a few things that aren't in our collection, but they're historically sort of important to set the scene for Matisse. So Matisse is, before he goes to Collioure in 1905, he's on the French Riviera painting with not Derain, but an artist who was the great sort of follower, protege, shall we say, of Georges Seurat, and that's Paul Signac. So Signac and Matisse are working together in the summer of 1904, and this is where, more or less, Matisse has a kind of breakthrough, and that relates to these two paintings. One is a study, the other is the finished painting. So on the left is the study for the painting that's called Lux, Calme et Volupté. It almost always goes by the French title, which kind of means luxury or luxuriousness, calmness and pleasure. Lux, Calme et Volupté from 1904. This is today in in MoMA, the sketch. And then this is the finished painting based on the sketch, which is in the Pompidou Center, the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. And so same title, Lux, Calme et Volupté, from 1904. So these go together. When he's there, he's working on this sketch, and then from this sketch, he does this finished painting. Now, Signac, of course, is the great champion of Seurat, in post-impressionism, the artist we associate with divisionism, pointillism, with optical mixtures, putting paint down in little daubs next to each other and letting the eye do a lot of the mixing, like those artists like Seurat, certainly, and Cézanne and others, going back to Delacroix. The Fauves were interested in color theory. They were certainly aware of these ideas, and Seurat had been very inspirational for them. Signac had picked up the mantle of Seurat, who dies very young. He dies in his 30s. So Signac picks up the mantle, and now is sort of a kind of inspiration to these younger artists, Matisse, Derain, and others. Of course, Signac's interesting, and I've said this before if you've heard me talk about Signac. He starts off, he's very dedicated to Seurat. That's my guy, my God, he's like my father, my God, etc. But of course, Seurat only paints 7 major paintings in his lifetime because his technique is so meticulous and slow. So Signac first says, well, I can do that. And I'm going to be very disciplined, little dots, And then he realized, my God, if I do this, I'll only paint 7 paintings if I live to be 90. So then you see in Signac this kind of expansion. They go from dots to little daubs to little lozenges, and then all of a sudden it's like a little bit of everything. And you kind of sense that here. The different brushwork in Matisse is responding to, certainly, Signac. It's very high-pitched. These are very high-pitched paintings in terms of their color. Now this title, Lux comme volupté, is from Baudelaire. It's from a poem by Baudelaire called Invitation to the Voyage from 1857. And what this poem was that Baudelaire wrote back in the 19th century was about a group of travelers who go off to this island, this kind of mythic paradise. That's this island where they're going to have nothing but a kind of hedonistic, pleasurable existence, making love, etc., in the sunlight, all of that. So it was a purely kind of hedonistic, pastoral, bucolic kind of idea. And that fit in very nicely, certainly with Matisse's ideas about what painting should be. It's certainly not a disturbing subject. These paintings were probably painted at Signac's house in Saint-Tropez, so looking out from his house. They have a classical, idyllic, pastoral, Arcadian. I mean, you can't get more Arcadian than nudes in the landscape by the sea here, right? Of course, our guy Cézanne, who we just spent 14 weeks talking about, or 14 talks about, is relevant here as well. And so from this to this is really a breakthrough. The finished painting is really a breakthrough painting for Matisse because he even goes beyond Neo-Impressionism, the style we associate with Seurat, to a much greater embracing of abstraction. It's abstract, it's bucolic, it's pastoral, it's positive, it's light-drenched. He's laying colors down next to each other. He's referencing all kinds of previous precedents, Cézanne and other artists, so it has a certain pedigree. But this is a short-lived kind of sojourn for Matisse. Only a couple of these kind of pointillist paintings when he's with Signac, and very quickly he goes past that. And that takes us here to 1905, 1906. And now we're at the Barnes Foundation to see this in Philadelphia. This is The Joy of Life, Matisse, 1905, 1906. Certainly, all of the Fauves are influenced by the post-impressionists. They're influenced by Seurat, Gauguin, Van Gogh, Cézanne. They turn away from the impressionist ideas of this more kind of ephemeral, fleeting effects of light and atmosphere. They embrace the bolder colors, certainly, of the post-impressionists. But now you see Matisse changing away from that kind of touch, that kind of pointillist divisionist technique. And he's laying the paint down in flatter, big slabs of big sort of flat areas of color now, like a big puzzle. So what's going on here? Well, you always have to look at what's going on around these artists at the time. In other words, what are they seeing? Where are they going? So we have some big events here. In 1903 was a huge retrospective in Paris on Gauguin. So every one of these painters attended that retrospective of Gauguin. And this is how Gauguin paints, with these big flat areas of disembodied color, very abstract. So that had been at the Salon d'Automne in 1903, again, if you heard the Cézanne talks, the biggest event later in 1907 is when there's the big retrospective of Cézanne. Cézanne dies in 1906, but in 1907 there's a huge retrospective, and it has even a bigger impact than this Gauguin exhibition does on a whole host of artists. So what you see here is an increase in abstraction, greater detachment from nature. Certainly it's nature, but as Gauguin would say, as he said quite literally, don't copy nature too literally. That was his advice to his younger protégés, those artists we started with, the Nabi, Cerisier, Vuillard, Bonnard, when they were all up at Pont-Aven. I told you about that little art lesson where Gauguin's looking over Cerisier's shoulder as he's looking across the river at this grove of trees, and he's just kind of sitting there looking, and Gauguin says, how do you feel those trees? And Cerisier says, I don't know, I feel they're red. And Gauguin says, well, then use your best red. So that's what we're talking about here, the legacy of Gauguin. The thing that will always be prevalent in Matisse is this love of these Arcadian, pastoral, bucolic subjects, nothing threatening here. Nobody's being hung or shot or hanging from a tree or something. There are all these beautiful, sensuous nudes. Matisse is so conscious of art history that he's in this tradition of the pastoral going back to Titian and Giorgione and coming all the way through the French Rococo. So that's kind of positive, joyful, uplifting subject matter. It's sensory painting, certainly, flatness, color, abstraction, changes in perspective. So it is much more based on, it's not literally a dream. Gauguin would advocate that, just dream things up. But it's certainly based on nature, but it's also based on a high degree of personal abstraction, sort of filtering things through this temperament. So these are the paintings, the pointillist paintings, then the joy of life, that are kind of showing Matisse now he's ready to do something different. And that brings us to this. So this is the shot across the bow, I guess, in modern painting of the 20th century. This is Woman with a Hat from 1905, which is in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And then this is a press clipping that shows the painting, and here's the open window, art painting. This was from a journal called Illustration from November 4th, 1905. It was essentially a kind of a review of the exhibition, and they reproduced these two paintings, among others, here. So this takes us to there are these certain watershed moments in art history when things happen. And this is how we describe the Autumn Salon in Paris at the Grand Palais in 1905. And at that Autumn Salon in Paris, which has many rooms, many artists, in room number 7 were the works of this young group of painters who had kind of situated themselves around Matisse. Matisse never thought of himself as the leader of any movement or group, but because he was the older, he was 35, they were really young. They kind of looked up to Matisse as their kind of figurehead. And so at the Salon d'Automne in 1905, they had basically their own room, with the exception of one sculpture that was in the center of the room, which was not by any of the Fauves. It was a kind of a neo-Renaissance sculpture of a little child, of a young child. I'm going to show you something that we think what it looked like. And when one critic who wrote about this exhibition came into that room, so what he saw were all these crazy bombastic paintings all around on the walls. And then in the center, there was this little childlike neo-Renaissance, kind of like Donatello bust. And so he said in his review that it was like Donatello among the wild beasts. And that's the word fauve. Fauve means beast. So he said, what the heck, this poor little sculpture is among these wild beasts. And that room came to be known, because they were all animals, the room came to be known as the cage. So people would say when word started to spread, they would say, "Have you seen Room 7, the cage?" With all these crazy guys. And so that's how this all sort of came about. This painting was in the show, and it was the centerpiece of the show in many ways, although our painting was in it as well, the open window. But this is the painting that came in for the most criticism, and people just got apoplectic about this painting. It seemed to, first of all, deny drawing, it denied contour, it denied academic sort of ideas about modeling in light and shadow, it stressed the flatness, it had areas where the exposed canvas was being shown, it had jarring juxtapositions of color, it had really horrible kind of sense of drawing. What the heck is this, a flipper? That's supposed to be her arm. She's turning over a chair, so she's kind of leaning over a chair. This is Matisse's wife. She never lived this one down. All of this, but again, you look at this face and then go back to Madame Cézanne. If you just saw the Cézanne show, this face wouldn't exist without Cézanne. So again, Matisse is certainly aware. This hat with all the flowers, and then just this myriad of abstract washes of color in which he's varying his paint application. There's thick impasto, there's thin areas, he drags the brush, he uses a palette knife. I mean, everything that you could think about that you could cram into a painting is here. And most people just sort of fainted in front of it. The one person who didn't, well, actually he did kind of faint in front of it in a certain way, was Leo Stein. So Leo Stein was the sister of Gertrude, the brother of Gertrude Stein, and they were both, had come from Baltimore and now were in Paris. And ultimately, Leo Stein will be he'll be attracted to Matisse's work, and Gertrude Stein will be attracted more to Picasso's work. But they start to collect. In any case, Leo Stein saw this painting. He was at the show in 1905, and he called it, quote, "the nastiest smear of paint I had ever seen." But you have to give him credit. He said it was the nastiest smear of paint I had ever seen, and then he bought it. Because he just knew this was going to be an important painting in art history. So despite his initial shock, he got over his shock, and he purchased it. And here it is hanging in the apartment in Paris, in the Stein apartment that they shared in Paris. And of course, there's the portrait of Gertrude Stein by Picasso. I mean, what can you say about this apartment? It's quite a place. So here is the catalog. This is one of the existing still catalogs, a little bit beaten up, of the 1905 Salon d'Automne, and this is the Grand Palais where the show was held here. This photograph is about 5 years earlier, probably around 1900. Now, a lot of different things were in the Salon every year. It was chock-filled with lots of different things. Here's the room devoted to Renoir, and the room devoted to Toulouse-Lautrec. So they both had rooms dedicated to them in the Salon, in that 1905 Salon. It's a horrible photograph here, but it's the best I could find. It's really kind of blurry. You don't see this very often. This is room 7, although you can't pick out anything except this sculpture. This is room 7 in the Salon d'Automne. None of these artists are names you probably are familiar with. This sculpture is by a man named Albert Marc, and this is Marc here. So he made this sculpture here. There are other people here that I don't think we need to sort of mention, but this is a young girl, 1905, by Marc. So this is a sculpture by Marc, and this is one here. This was created in 1905, and this is a textured sand-colored terracotta that's fired with a glaze. So it's a terracotta. It has a sand-colored terracotta. Then he put a glaze on it, and then he fired it. It's in a private collection today. But this is probably what the sculpture by Mark looked like that was in the 1905 exhibition. It looked something like this. Here, it probably wasn't this one, because the one that was there was, we think, was bronze. This sculptor was very well known, actually maybe more well known, as a maker of dolls. His dolls are very collectible today. In fact, I saw one come up on the Antiques Roadshow. His dolls are very, very collectible. So he was not just the sculptor, but he was a doll maker, and a very, very important one. But this is probably the type of sculpture that when the critic came through and saw this, he went, oh my God, it's Donatello among the wild beasts. So here's the guy who coins that phrase. This is his review. Oh my God. and that's just the first page. I mean, this is parenthetical, but it's amazing how important this stuff was to people. Today, we don't have this. I mean, these were big events. People talked about it. They were interested in it. They were worried about it. They couldn't get enough of it, whether it was good, whether it was bad, scandalous, whatever. I mean, and that just isn't the case today. I don't care where you are, New York City, whatever. It still just isn't the case anymore. So this is Louis Vauxhall. This is a drawing by Jules Charest. Charest was the guy who did the posters prior to Toulouse-Lautrec. This is a charcoal drawing, and it's dedicated to Vauxhall, his friend. So this is the critic who, in this review of the Salon d'Automne, in this journal, here's the title of the journal, Le Blas, October 17th was the date, 1905. This is where he says, when I went into that room, it looked like Donatello among the wild beasts. He referred to the colors as an orgy of tones. And so his review was, it wasn't even so much that it was negative. He was just shocked. He seemed to be a little bit punch drunk. And he was just trying to, I don't know what the hell is going on, but this is what it looked like, at least to me. So in that 1905 exhibition are, with a couple of exceptions, almost all of the original Fauves. Now, that included Matisse. I've tried to find photographs close to 1905. This is the Steichen photograph of Matisse working on his sculpture, the Serpentine. So this is 1909. This is André Derain from 1903. Couldn't find a close one for Vlaminck. This is probably to the 1920s, Maurice Vlaminck. And somebody we talked about already in one of the initial rooms, Georges Rouault. Here, these are four of the most well-known, all of whom were in the original 1905 show. This is Albert Marquet. He was in the show. From, again, this is a little bit later, probably the 20s. This is Raoul Dufy. He was in the show, 1905. No, I'm sorry, Dufy didn't come in until 1906. This is Georges Braque, the young Braque. Dufy and Braque were very close friends, and they didn't exhibit in the 1905 show. They exhibited in the 1906 Fauve exhibition. This is Braque in 1910. And then Kees van Dongen is here, who was actually Netherlandish by birth, but then he became a French citizen. And he's the guy who did that Zaida painting, that we have at the entrance, the lady with the red face. So that's Van Dongen. These are all part of, more or less, they may come in a year later or so, but they're all part of the original Fauves. I'm leaving one guy out, but I'm going to come back to him at the end because he deserves to be mentioned because he's not as well known as he should be, especially not in the United States. We don't even have a work by him in the National Gallery, but I will come back to him later. So here's the open window, and here's the window. That's the hotel. This is a photograph from 1942. Things hadn't changed much. So this is the open window, Collier, 1905. That's a photograph of the actual window. Matisse is 36 in 1905, not 35, he's 36. He has just come back from southern France. He has 15 paintings that he created while he was down there, including this one. And he's very pleased now. He thinks, okay, I'm where now, I got through all that pointillist stuff and this, that, and the other thing, and now I'm sort of where I should be. And he submits all 15 canvases to that salon in 1905. And it's in part because of that, he had more paintings than anybody else in the show, that he was the most reviled because they just had more material to make fun of. So he, and again, in that regard, because he was older, because he seemed to be the one taking a lot of the heat, he then seemed to be, he then became a kind of de facto leader of the group. Now, one could spend 3 days talking about this painting from a technical point of view, and why it's so important and beautiful. It addresses and alters and changes whole perceptions of what painting should be. First of all, it's highly abstract. It has color that's not local color that is color that's true to nature. Wherever he feels he wants to put a color, whether it's true or not to what he sees, he certainly does it. It has every kind of brushstroke, this is the last vestige of pointillism. This is the final farewell to Signac. He just comes back to that little pointillist with the flower pots and the flowers. These strokes are sort of lozenges that go horizontally. The walls are big drags of paint that are very smooth and sort of pushed into the surface. All of that. It's a painting that has saturated colors. I mean, they're so bright and deep. It's not really, again, descriptive of nature. It's a kind of feeling about nature, shall we say. It has beautiful rhythms. I mean, it's just a gorgeous painting. About color, I mean, there are a lot of quotes you should read or look at. Matisse's famous Notes of a Painter. I quoted that to you in one of the previous lectures, where he says about, I want an art of balance and serenity and purity and all that. Because everything in 1908, Fauvism is pretty well finished, and Matisse is kind of reflecting now on what he's thinking about. So at one point he says, when I put a green, it is not grass. When I put a blue, it is not the sky. So in other words, if I want to make something blue or green or red or yellow, I don't care about whether that's the way it looks in nature or not. And then he goes on to say in another quote, construction by colored surfaces, search for the intensity of color, subject matter being unimportant, reaction against the diffusion of local tone and light, light expressed by a harmony of intensely colored surfaces. So he's talking about surface, flatness. This is a kind of, it doesn't deal with traditional perspective, but there's a nesting of these planes, from the wall to the French doors, to the balcony, to the water. So he kind of nests things together, but that keeps you very much still on the surface. Here are some of the brush strokes that you see here. And one of the most obvious things in this picture that makes it so bright is the way he pairs complementary colors. So throughout this painting, he pairs, for example, he pairs green with red, those are complementaries, blue with orange here. So throughout the painting, he's pairing complementary colors. That's what creates this kind of brightness, this interior light almost that just dazzles us. The different brush strokes, long, horizontal, slabs, dashes, dots, dragging. Look at the two sides of the room. They're totally different colors. Either the painter forgot to finish or something. So this is a green wall, this is a sort of reddish pink wall. That creates a vibration of color. One color is on the cool side, one is on the warm side. So you're getting almost a kind of vibration across that two-dimensional surface. It's almost like wavelengths of color when you see color sort of diagrammed on the spectrum. Intellectually, art historically, he's playing with a time-honored tradition. in Western painting, which is the window. So here in Dutch painting, this is a painting we have at the National Gallery by Peter de Hoek, the bedroom. This is just a detail. I'm not showing you the whole thing. Going through this door and outside here. This is a painting from 1658. You cannot pick, if you're going to do something new and you want to make a statement about how it fits in with the tradition of art history, then you should pick a subject that has a long tradition in art history that everybody is aware of, so that they'll understand, oh gosh, this is not how this has been done. And so he takes the idea of the open window, because since the Renaissance, the idea was that a painting was supposed to be a window to the world, and that when you looked out your window, you saw nature, everything was logical, local color, beautiful perspective, and that's what a painting should reflect. Of course, that breaks down by the end of the 19th century. It breaks down with Van Gogh and Gauguin, certainly the post-impressionists, Cézanne. It's then accelerated, the breakdown is accelerated by the invention of photography in 1839, because of course, then an artist can say, look at, if you, like Manet, for example, can say something like, look at, if you want to see nature, then I would suggest you look out your window, because that's not what I paint. I paint on a flat surface. I put a lot of colors on a flat surface, and that's what painting is. So if you want to see something really beautifully, has beautiful perspective and color and everything, then go look out your window, or take a photograph, buy a camera. So this is the legacy, the inheritance, shall we say, of Cézanne, of Matisse. And he certainly was aware of the window as fraught with all kinds of preconceptions. So he's playing with all of those. Again, the different kind of close-up of the brush strokes. So we got long, sort of blending vertical sweeps of the brush. We've got short squiggles of the brush in the balcony. We've got longer pulls of paint. Remember, if you heard my Cézanne talk, Cézanne loved to drag the brush to create these pulls of paint often, and that's certainly something that Matisse is doing here. So the very notion of an open window is an invitation to look into the distance, to look out the window, so to speak. But of course, this painting is all about the tension on the surface. It has the implication of depth, but with these sort of panels of, these sort of embedded panels almost, it creates a very different, it's a painting that exists right on the edge of abstraction. It's not abstract. I mean, it's not completely abstract. You can see what's going on here. It's a room, it's a balcony, there are boats, etc. But it's really right there on the cusp. It's essentially flat, patterned surface filled with paint and color. Matisse knew this, the woman with the hat in this painting, almost all the paintings he put into that show, he knew that was a breakthrough for him. And he later talked about that, and he said, quote, Fauve painting is not everything, but it is the foundation of everything. So this is a very expressionistic way of painting. So when you think about Fauvism and Expressionism, what I always tell people is, all Fauves are expressionistic, but not all expressionists were Fauves. Got it? Okay. But there's a beautiful relationship between later the German expressionists, who will be aware of all of this, but they'll have a different tack than Matisse. Now we'll go through some of we'll go through some of his colleagues and friends. They all present a slightly different aspect of the movement. This is Maurice Vlaminck here, two paintings by Vlaminck. These are all National Gallery pictures. They might not all be up. This one is up. This one's not up at the moment. So this is a woman with a hat from 1905. This was in that 1905 show. And then Tugboat on the Seine here. Chateau, which is the town where he was from, 1906. Matisse is deliberate, he's reserved, he's refined, he's kind of elegant, quiet, You know, like Cézanne, his father wanted him to be a lawyer. He dresses every day, and you know, he looks like a lawyer. Vlaminck is just the opposite. Vlaminck at one point says, Vlaminck is what I call a gut painter. This guy just starts picking up the paints and let's see what I can do. And he looks at a couple of inspirational sources. The most important is Van Gogh, and then Matisse. And then he just says, okay, I think I can do that. And he just starts slashing paint around at one time, but there's more to it than that in terms of his personality, because at one point he says, quote, "What I could have done in real life only by throwing a bomb, I tried to achieve in painting." So he is almost an anarchist of the Fauves in terms of his approach to painting. Another great quote is when he said, as I told you already, "I love Van Gogh more than my father." That was a great quote from Vlaminck as well. And then his other great thing he was so proud of was that he had never once stepped foot in the Louvre. So he couldn't have cared less about art history, about all that old master mumbo jumbo. He had never once stepped foot in the Louvre. So he was just going to be a modern painter. And so his paintings are the most aggressive. They're raw, they're untutored in a beautiful way. He certainly understands a lot of what Fauvism was about, but his work explodes off the surface. And it's all about a kind of, they're almost reckless at times. You really sense he's pushing the way he's trying to achieve certain things. They're rebellious, they have a roughness, and that totally is in keeping with his personality. He had a lot of interest. He was a big guy, you saw that photograph. He was a big guy, muscular guy, but then he played the violin. Music was one of his interests. He raced, he was a bicyclist, a cyclist, he raced. So he has lots of interests. This is Chateau here on the right, and this is Renoir at Chateau. So you couldn't see something more different. Chateau is this little town along the river where the Impressionists painted, spelled C-H-A-T-O-U. So this is Oarsman at Chateau by Renoir, and this is the tug that we just looked at on the Seine. So the Renoir is from 1879, and the Vlaminck is from 1906. They're about 20 years apart or so. And everything about the Renoir is this beautiful diaphanous curtain of atmosphere and light and color, and it's a very delightful scene of people. With Renoir, you know, everybody's clean and well-dressed. They brush their teeth. They comb their hair. And the Vlaminck picture is just very, very, very different. Vlaminck doesn't even like to show these pleasurable scenes. This is a working tug. So this is a kind of a labor scene, a kind of work scene, a proletariat kind of subject, you might say. This painting I showed you in the very first lecture, just when we were talking about that room, about extending tradition, remember that first room? That was kind of a catch-all. And the reason this painting is in that room is because it is another Fauve painting. It was owned by Ilse Mellon, which her collection dominates those rooms. And this is Matisse, a still life from 1905. So again, this was a kind of a way of trying to transition from the downstairs up to the upstairs. And then this is Vlaminck on the right, Chestnut Trees in Bloom from 1905. This is currently off view. This is on view still. Just getting a little closer, these are actual details, but they look like full paintings, but actually they're a little bit closer than what I showed you before. And you can see what we're talking about. Look at this. Man, this is great. I mean, and here, of course, you know, you can't get away from Cézanne. I don't care who you are, if you got a half a brain in your head. And so a lot of the brushwork here is the reflecting Mont Saint-Victoire, the great paintings by Cézanne. Marquet is maybe not as well known, but he is one of the original Fauves. He shows at the 1905 exhibition, and we have a number of works. This is on view. Posters at Trovy from 1906. This is Off View, the Pont Neuf from 1906. There's a city that's very important in Fauvism because so many painters come from there. And it's not in the south of France, it's in the north of France on the Normandy coast. It's Le Havre. And Marquet was a native of that city. Braque was raised in that city. Dufy comes from that town. So there's a camaraderie in that particular regard. It was a coastal resort town on the Normandy coast. So what you see here is certainly a lessening in Marquet's work. It's much more about those sort of Gauguin-inspired flatter areas of color, not so much the thick brushwork and the impasto, but he's definitely obviously interested in patterning. So this use of all the billboards and patterning like this just again calls attention to surface. This painting is a little darker, but here you have a thicker kind of application of the paint. These high vantage points, this is very much indebted to Derain's views of London, where Derain gave himself very often high vantage points looking down at the bridges that went across the Thames. And here is Dufy, Raoul Dufy, on the left, July 14th in Le Havre from 1906, so it's Bastille Day here. And Saint-Genès here, which is a mountain in 1910. Dufy is very much, Dufy and Braque come to Fauvism the year after that exhibition. They're not there in 1905. They joined the group in 1906. But Dufy had seen Matisse's paintings throughout 1905, and this was a kind of epiphany. So he says about having first seen and discovered Matisse, he says, quote, "For me, Impressionist realism lost all its charms when I saw the miracle of imagination introduced into drawing and color. I suddenly grasped the new mechanic of painting." This is his response to Matisse, that Matisse sort of shows him the way. So he then fully embraces a Fauvist approach to painting. But again, he very much likes pattern. So whether it's billboards, flags, pennants, banners, things of that nature. And then he goes through here. So this is 1906, but this is 1910. And what you have to understand about Fauvism is that it is very, very short-lived. From 1905, I would say, with that exhibition, to 1908. That's like 3 years. After 1908, all of these artists are splintering and going off in different directions, but one of the directions that many of them go to and go into is to Cézanne. They decide, you know, I love all this color and bombast and brushstroke and color and all this, but I got to have a little bit more structure. So this is 1910, and already Dufy is starting to look now and thinking back to Cézanne. So Cézanne becomes very important. This is 1910, so he had seen the 1907 exhibition, the retrospective after Cézanne's death. All these guys went to that show, and so all of a sudden Cézanne starts really coming forward in their thinking. What he does not do, but what his fellow Le Havrian, however you say that, I don't know how you say it, who's a guy from Le Havre, Braque, what Dufy doesn't do is embrace Cubism. Braque will ultimately go towards Cubism. So he'll take Cézanne and then go further, and that's what brings him into contact eventually with Picasso. Now, the guy, I mentioned this when we looked at one of his paintings in the Extending Tradition Gallery, but that was a very late painting. Remember the Breton Wedding that we looked at? That was like from the 37, I think, or 40 even. But that's Georges Rouault. Rouault is an original Fauve, and these are paintings he exhibited in 1905 and 1906. So on the left is Café Scene, 1906. Nude with upraised arms on the right, 1906. He is an original Fauve. He's part of the group, but he is definitely the odd man out. He does not share the same kind of pure joie de vivre, and, life is great and everything's sunny and beautiful color and subject matter that's not troubling. It doesn't really, I don't want to get into politics or anything like that. That's certainly Matisse. That's not Rouault. Rouault, remember I mentioned to you, comes out of the same class as Matisse, and that is he studies with Gustave Moreau. So here's Rouault, and here's Matisse. So they're in the same class at the École des Beaux-Arts. They study with Gustave Moreau. And as I mentioned to you earlier, if you heard that lecture, Rouault is Moreau's favorite student. And in fact, it's not just that he is his favorite student. They have a father-son connection. They're incredibly close. And so even though he had Matisse and Marquet was in this class too. He's right there before he grows his little mustache. So you got three Fauves coming out of this one class right here. So Moreau is incredibly important, and I talked about the way he allowed students to follow their instincts. He wasn't a particularly controlling professor. In the academy, it was very often, as I said to you before, you might come up as a student and say, wow, I don't know, I would really like to work on color today. And he would say, I'm sorry, today's drawing. And Moreau would not do that. If you were hot on a topic, he'd say, okay, go do it. And show me what you want, show me what you've got. With Rouault, though, there was an incredible closeness. And when Moreau was on his deathbed, he said to Rouault, quote, I would leave my uniform of the Academy of Fine Arts to you. Only you would burst all its seams. So you're so far beyond anybody at the École, that if I gave you my uniform, you would burst it because you're already bigger than with you wouldn't fit anymore. Now, what makes Rouault different than the other Fauves is that he's clearly concerned with subject matter that the rest of them are not. So prostitution, people marginalized, clowns, saltimbanques, people who are dispossessed, people who live on the fringe of society. All of that is something he is interested in. He has a compassion. He was very religious, and I think that also tied to Moreau. So they had a certain religious sort of bent. He was concerned with the plight of people. He's a compassionate painter. He wants to call attention to this. He portrays himself repeatedly in self-portraits as a clown. So this idea that I'm part of this dispossessed kind of, just like Picasso portrays himself as Harlequin, Picasso paints saltimbanques, the dispossessed, those people on the fringe. This is also what Rouault does. In that sense, he's very different. His colors are dark, they're muddy, they don't have, in many ways, he has nothing to do, really, with Fauvism, except that he was there, he's part of the group, but his language is really, really quite different. This is Van Dongen, here, the one that we have up on the wall as you enter today, the 20th century, Saïd, 1913. And this is not in our collection, but I wanted to bring it in. This is in a private collection. It's called Femme Fatale from 1905. So this is Dongen at the time of the Fauve exhibition in 1905. He's part of this group. But he's like Rouault in a certain way. He stands apart. Rouault stands apart, and in some ways he has more in common with Northern painting, Rouault does. That's definitely the case with Van Dongen. He starts with the Fauves, but he ends up with the German Expressionists. He then becomes a part of the Brücke. So he will actually transfer his allegiance from French Fauvism to German Expressionism. And he is Netherlandish by birth, but he became a French citizen. So that Northern sort of quality of his life certainly comes through. So this, that's a little tough. When you look at it, it's a little spooky and mask-like face and all of that. So he's already kind of heading out of Fauvism. Even when he starts, he's already heading towards language that would be much more appropriate for the Germans. Now we come to Braque. Most people don't realize Braque was a Fauve. We always think of Braque and Picasso together as the sort of founders of Cubism. But this is Braque's painting that we have up, the port of Ciotat from 1907. Braque is a Fauve, and he's part of the original group. He doesn't exhibit in the 1905 show. He exhibits with them in 1906. His stay with Fauvism is brief, 2 years, but that's pretty much true with almost all of them. And he's already, by 1907, he's met Picasso, and he's already starting to move away from Fauvism. And sometimes you have to be careful when you know where somebody ends up, and then you look at their earlier stuff, we tend to then think, well, of course, I could see he was always heading there. But I think in Braque it's true, because in a lot of Fauve paintings, you wouldn't get this. That's all pretty structural. It's pretty logical. It owes a lot to Cézanne. And so despite all of the activity and the beauty and the brushwork here, Braque inherently, he's again an artist who feels like, I got to have a little more foundation under my feet. I can't just be a riot of color. So here's the way they hang in the gallery. Braque against Matisse when you go up to the gallery. Now there's one guy I held back, but I want to mention him because I feel so bad for the guy. Because he's really a very good painter, but I would venture to say not many people have heard of him. It's this guy here who has a very strange first name, Othon, O-T-H-O-N is his first name. His last name is Fries, F-R-I-E-S-Z, Othon Fries. He dies in 1949, so a few years before. Matisse dies in 54. He is one of the original Fauves, and he shows at that 1905 exhibition. He comes from Le Havre, so with Dufy and Braque, they're all buddies growing up together. Marquet as well is from that town. He comes from a family of shipbuilders. He's, again, a kind of a guy, he's pretty rough and ready, man of the sea in some ways. He's born in Le Havre, and then that's where Dufy is born as well. And then he studies at the School of Fine Arts in Le Havre, which is where Dufy studies, as well as George Braque. Braque is born in Argenteuil, but when the family is he's still basically a young boy, the family moves to Le Havre. So I'm showing you where that town is because it's so important. It's right up there on the northern coast of France. So all these guys come up together. These are works by Fries. Here on the left, The Port of Antwerp from 1906. It's in a private collection. His work is around the United States. MoMA has a few. This one is in the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk. This is Autumn Landscape, 1906. He's probably how many people have heard of this guy? Wow. Okay, I feel like I really accomplished something. This guy should be better known. So, I'm sorry, but he should. I saw a show of his, an exhibition of his at Saint-Tropez. I was doing one of these tours again, and it was really quite stunning. So here he is, incredible sense of color, brushwork again. He goes to Antwerp, this is Antwerp, with Braque. They paint together in Antwerp, the port of Antwerp. Braque did a series of paintings as well. Then he goes off into the countryside, of course. These are just really magnificent paintings. They got everything you expect from Fauvism. In fact, in some ways, he's Vlaminck with a little refinement. Vlaminck is not particularly refined, and you love that. I mean, it's great. But Fries has that same kind of aggressive, beautiful sort of intensity, but he has a little better sense of refinement. So he really brings together a whole host of Fauvist ideas. But then we have, with almost all these guys, Matisse, but certainly Dufy, Derain, Fries, there is this desire for a return to order. That's what I call it. Okay, I've done all this, but I don't know, I'm a little bit shaky. And that means I gotta snuggle up with Cézanne. Cézanne gives me what I need. So here is Braque. 1 year after Fauvism is pretty well done. 1909, this is our painting of Harbor here at the National Gallery. This is Derain. This is a National Gallery picture that's off view. It's the old bridge from 1910. and this is frieze. Provençal landscape, 1914. He even goes to Provence and paints Mont Saint-Victoire. Not only does he look at Cézanne, I'm going to go back and retrace the guy's steps, and I'm going to look at the same things that he looked at. So this is, we're talking about Fauvism, but Cézanne, again, he is a shadow and an influence over every one of these artists. They may go in a different direction. And then, of course, he's going to be even more at the heart of Cubism. But believe me, that's why when I talked about Cézanne, remember Picasso said he was the mother of us all, and Matisse said he was the father of us all. So Cézanne is definitely important. Fauvism is short-lived. Here's a nice little tableau of National Gallery Fauve paintings here. So 3 Durans across the top that I've shown you. Braque, Marquet, and Vlaminck along the bottom. So we do have a wonderful collection of Fauve paintings. Fauvism is the first modern art movement of the 20th century, 1905. It's before the Cubists really get going. So that's why I've chosen to talk about this before we talk about Picasso. And Braque. There were a number of other things that influenced these artists, and again, it relates to exhibitions that they saw. There was a big exhibition of Persian miniatures in Paris around 1904, so this bright color of Persian art, Islamic art. I mean, these guys were looking at a lot. Gauguin, we've mentioned, Cézanne is important. In any case, we'll pick up next time with Cubism. Thanks very much.